All failed to break the Alpha King's curse, until a forgotten Omega kissed him. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now back to our heroine, the forgotten Omega named Elara. The night the kingdom gathered beneath the frostlit sky, Elara stood at the edge of the courtyard like a shadow no one bothered to notice. Her breath puffed into the cold air, thin and ghost-like, disappearing before anyone could see it. Much like she had disappeared from her pack's memory long ago. Lanterns swung overhead, spilling warm amber light across warriors and nobles adorned in silks and polished armor, their laughter bouncing off the stone walls. They were here for one reason, to witness the latest attempt to break the Alpha King's curse. For 7 years every healer, priest, sorcerer and mystic had tried to free him from the shadow blight that twisted his wolf and chained his mind. And for 7 years they had all failed. Elara wasn't supposed to be here. She was only assigned to scrub the steps after the ceremony, just another Omega whose name had slipped quietly off the records. But something pulled her closer tonight. Something she couldn't name. Maybe it was the way the torches flickered as if warning the crowd. Maybe it was the strange tug in her chest whenever she thought of the cursed king locked inside the obsidian chamber. Or maybe it was because forgotten things sometimes felt the tremors of destiny before anyone else did. A horn sounded. The crowd fell silent. The chamber doors groaned open, and a blast of icy wind swept through the courtyard, carrying with it a low, tortured growl that made even seasoned alphas flinch. 2 royal guards dragged chains thick as a man's wrist, each link carved with runes that pulsed a faint red. And bound at the end of those chains, barefoot, shirt torn, breaths ragged, was the Alpha King, Kael Thornborn. Even cursed, he was devastating. Broad shoulders, dark hair matted to his jawline, muscles coiled with feral power. But it was his eyes that made Elara's pulse stutter, silver, fractured with streaks of black shadow, like moonlight fighting storm clouds. The court watched him the way people watch a wildfire. Fascinated, terrified, and convinced someone else would be the one burned. The high priestess stepped forward, her robes glittering with runes. "Bring him to his knees," she commanded. The guards obeyed, yanking the chains until Kael crashed to the ground, breath ripping from his lungs. The watching crowd murmured, some with pity, others with calculation. Elara clenched her hands at her sides, a strange ache tightening in her chest. She'd never met the king, never seen him this close, yet something inside her recognized the pain twisting through him. Raw, consuming, lonely. The high priestess lifted her staff. "We will attempt the rite of severance. Stand ready." The runes ignited. Kael roared, the sound ripping through the courtyard, shaking dust from ancient walls. Several spectators stumbled back. A beta fainted. The air crackled with heat, with violence, with magic unraveling at the seams. But even from the shadows Elara could see it. The spell wasn't working. The curse pushed back, darker and stronger than anything the priestess summoned. Black veins clawed across Kael's skin, rising toward his throat. He choked, muscles seizing, body arching against the stone. "Stop!" someone cried. "He'll die." The priestess didn't stop. She couldn't. The curse burst outward in a shockwave. People screamed. Guards were thrown backward. Torches shattered. Elara stumbled, dropping to one knee as energy rippled through her, strange and electric. And then, for one impossible heartbeat, Kael's gaze snapped to hers. Silver. Shadowed. Searching. Seeing her. The forgotten Omega who shouldn't have been there. The one everyone else looked through as if she were made of dust. And as the world trembled around them, Elara felt it. A whisper in her bones, a pull she couldn't deny. As if destiny had just turned its face toward her and said, "Finally. I found you." The world held its breath as the ritual's energy exploded outward, sending shockwaves through the air. Elara's heart raced in her chest, the pull between her and the Alpha King more palpable than ever. For a brief, terrifying moment, she thought she might lose her balance and fall into the chaos of the crowd. The Alpha King, still on his knees, his chains rattling as the curse lashed out, locked eyes with her, his silver gaze now tinted with an edge of desperation. His roar echoed in her ears, But it was not the roar of a beast. It was the cry of a man in torment. A king crushed beneath a weight he couldn't lift. She could see the agony in his expression as he fought against the curse that clung to him like a prison, his body convulsing with each pulse of the dark magic. Without thinking, Elara stepped forward, the cold stone beneath her feet feeling like it was pulling her closer to him, as if something beyond her control was guiding her. As she moved, the energy in the air shifted. It wasn't just the curse that thrummed with power. Something inside her was awakening too. Her hands, trembling with uncertainty, reached out instinctively as if drawn by the same force that had brought them together. The high priestess, her face pale, screamed for the guards to restrain him, but it was too late. Kael's feral eyes followed Elara, and for the first time in years, there was a flicker of recognition. His lips parted, a word hanging between them, though no sound came. His breath was ragged, his chest rising and falling with the effort of each painful inhale. The crowd was frozen, the tension thickening with every passing second. Elara felt her heart race in her throat, the air growing heavier as the Alpha King's curse tightened around them both. Without thinking, without hesitation, Elara moved closer. She placed her palm on his chest, her fingers brushing against his heart. For a moment, she felt nothing but the pounding of his heart beneath her touch. Then something changed. A warmth spread from her hand into his body, the energy swirling like a whirlwind. Her breath caught in her throat as her mind seemed to open up, and images, feelings, and memories not her own flooded her senses. The pain he carried, the torment of the curse, the darkness that had consumed him. It all poured into her. And then, without warning, she kissed him. The moment their lips met, the world seemed to stop. There was no sound, no movement, only the rush of magic that crackled between them like a storm. Kael's entire body went still, the chains that had bound him shaking as if the curse itself was unraveling. Elara felt it too. The magic, once dark and suffocating, shifted. The blackness that had consumed him began to retreat, dissolving in the light of their connection. Kael's body trembled, and the chains around his wrists snapped with a sudden resounding crack. The crowd gasped in shock, but Elara didn't pull away. She kept her lips pressed against his, her heart thudding with the certainty that she was the key to breaking the curse. As the kiss deepened, the last of the dark magic faded, leaving only silence in its wake. The Alpha King's body went slack, and for the first time in years, his eyes softened. The silver had returned to his gaze, and there was no trace of the cursed shadow. Slowly, cautiously, Elara pulled away, her breath shaky, her heart racing with the enormity of what had just happened. The Alpha King, still kneeling before her, blinked as if waking from a long, painful slumber. His gaze met hers, and in that instant the world shifted. He reached up, his fingers trembling as they touched her face, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You." His voice was hoarse, cracked with emotion. "You broke it. You saved me." Elara opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She could barely comprehend what had just happened. The crowd remained silent, watching the scene unfold in stunned disbelief. The high priestess, still recovering from the shock, stepped forward hesitantly. It worked," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "The curse is broken." Kael stood slowly, his strength returning with each passing second. His hands were no longer bound, and the oppressive energy that had surrounded him seemed to have lifted. He stood tall, his regal presence returning as if the curse had never existed. The silence that had filled the courtyard was broken by the sound of his voice, deep and commanding. "This woman," he said, his voice ringing out across the crowd, "is no longer an Omega. She is my mate, and you will all recognize her as such." Elara's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words settled over her like a wave, but before she could process it, Kael stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Elara," he said softly, "come with me." The crowd parted as he took her hand, guiding her through the stunned onlookers. The high priestess, still in shock, could only watch as the Alpha King led Elara away. The curse had been broken. But what now? Elara had no idea what to expect, but one thing was certain. Her life had just changed forever. As Kael guided Elara through the courtyard, the night held its breath as if the very air sensed the shift in destiny. The stunned crowd slowly parted, their eyes wide with disbelief as the once-forgotten Omega walked beside the newly freed Alpha King. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, each step feeling too loud, too exposed, as whispers rippled behind them like a rising tide. Elara could not tell if they whispered in awe, fear, or resentment, but none of it mattered in this moment because Kael's warm hand enveloped hers with a steadiness that felt both foreign and anchoring. When they crossed beneath the archway that marked the entrance to the citadel, the heavy stone door swung open on its own, reacting to the restored energy of its master. The halls inside were dim, lit by tall iron braziers burning cold blue flames that cast shadows onto the walls. Elara felt the prickle of magic on her skin, like a gentle hum beneath the surface of her thoughts, as if the palace itself was watching. Kael finally stopped in a private chamber that looked nothing like the harsh, cold legends told about him. The space was quiet, illuminated by a soft glow from a chandelier crafted of crystal shaped like frozen tears. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warmth across the thick rugs and carved wooden furniture. Kael released her hand slowly, as if afraid she might vanish the moment he let go. For a second they simply looked at each other, the weight of the curse's absence pressing on him like an unfamiliar cloak. He inhaled deeply, as though tasting freedom for the first time in years. "I have not breathed without pain since I was 20, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "But when you touched me, when you kissed me, everything changed. The darkness fled." Elara felt her cheeks warm, her voice barely above a whisper as she answered. "I did not know what I was doing. I still do not." Kael stepped closer, but slower this time, cautious not to overwhelm her. "Neither did I. But it was you. Only you." He lifted his hand from his side and gently brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch light, almost reverent. "Tell me, Elara, why were you in the courtyard tonight? You were not among those summoned." Elara hesitated. She had never spoken about the truth of her existence, not even to herself. "I was assigned to clean after the ceremony," she confessed, her voice tight with the weight of it. "No one remembers my name in the pack registry. I am an Omega who was forgotten long before your curse began." Kael's jaw tightened, anger sparking in his silver eyes. "Forgotten? By choice or cruelty?" She swallowed. "Cruelty, I think. It is easier for them to pretend I do not exist." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, but not toward her. He turned away, pacing once before he spoke again, his voice low and edged with fury. "I spent years chained by shadows while my council chose who was deemed worthy to stand before me. They never once mentioned you." When he faced her again, his expression softened. "But tonight the curse led me to you. Or perhaps fate did." The room seemed to grow warmer as he stepped closer. His presence was overwhelming but not frightening, like standing near a fire after years in the cold. "Elara," he murmured. "When the curse broke, I felt something else. A bond forming. Something older than magic and deeper than instinct." Her breath caught in her throat. "A bond." His voice dropped to a whisper that trembled with certainty. "You are my fated mate." The word struck her like a spark to tinder, lighting every vein in her body. She stumbled back a step, not in fear but in disbelief. "That is impossible," she said, shaking her head. "I am a forgotten Omega. I have no rank, no power, nothing that would make me the mate of a king." Kael did not look away. "And yet you broke the curse none could touch. You freed me when every priest, healer and sorcerer failed." He reached for her hand again, his touch grounding. "Tell me, Elara, does that sound like someone who is nothing?" She felt her throat tighten, emotion swelling painfully in her chest. Before she could speak, the doors to the chamber slammed open and a group of council members stormed in, their cloaks sweeping the floor like storm clouds. Their faces were twisted with fear, anger and disbelief. The first counselor stepped forward, his voice shaking as he pointed at Elara. "Your Majesty, she is an Omega. She cannot be your mate. This is a mistake. A threat. An impossibility." Kael stepped in front of her, his stance protective, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. "Challenge her again," he warned, "and you will answer to me." The counselors froze. Elara, breath trembling, realized something monumental. The curse was broken, but the kingdom was not ready for her. and destiny was only beginning to reveal the price of being chosen by the Alpha King. The council members stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief as Kael's protective stance enveloped Elara. The room was heavy with tension, and Elara could feel the weight of their glares bearing down on her like 1,000 sharp arrows. But Kael remained unyielding, his presence an unspoken promise that no one would touch her. "Your Majesty," the first counselor said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "This is madness. You cannot." Kael's silver eyes flashed dangerously, silencing the counselor before he could finish. "Silence," Kael growled, his voice low but commanding. "You will not question my decisions again. Elara is my mate, and I will not hear another word of defiance." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared challenge him further. Elara stood behind Kael, her heart racing, the weight of his words sinking into her. She was his mate. The idea was impossible, overwhelming, but there was no denying the bond they shared. A bond that had been forged in the most unexpected and magical way. Elara's mind raced as she tried to process everything that had happened since that fateful night in the courtyard. She had gone from a forgotten Omega, living in the shadows, to standing beside the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom. But what did it mean to be his mate? What did it mean for her future? Kael turned to her, his expression softening. "Come," he said gently, extending his hand toward her. "Let me show you the rest of the citadel." Hesitantly, Elara reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it in his. His touch was warm and reassuring, and for the first time since the chaos began, Elara felt a sense of calm. As they walked through the grand halls of the citadel, Elara's eyes darted around, taking in the beauty and majesty of the place. The stone walls were lined with intricate tapestries depicting the history of the kingdom, battles won, and kings who had ruled before Kael. But it was the silence that struck her the most. The silence of the people who had once revered Kael as a god, now afraid of him. The curse had changed everything. They finally reached the balcony, and Kael stepped out into the open air, the cool breeze brushing against their skin. Elara hesitated at the doorway, unsure of what to do next. "You do not have to be afraid," Kael said, sensing her hesitation. "You are no longer a forgotten Omega. You are my Luna, my equal. And you will never again live in the shadows." His words were like a balm to her soul, soothing the doubts and fears that had plagued her for so long. Elara stepped forward, standing beside him on the balcony, looking out at the kingdom that had once shunned her. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael's gaze softened as he looked out over the land. "Now we rebuild. Together." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with determination. "There will be challenges ahead. The kingdom will not accept our bond easily. The council will try to tear us apart, and others will seek to use you against me. But we will face them together." Elara's heart swelled at his words, the weight of his commitment settling on her like a protective shield. For the first time in her life she felt like she had a purpose. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer alone. "I am with you," she said softly, her voice steady. Kael smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I know." The sound of footsteps interrupted their moment, and a messenger approached, bowing before the king. "Your Majesty," the messenger said, "we have received word from the western border. There are rumors of a rebellion brewing. The nobles are restless, and they seek to challenge your rule." Kael's expression darkened, his hand tightening around Elara's. "We will not let them tear this kingdom apart," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "Prepare the army. We leave at dawn." The messenger nodded and quickly left to carry out the orders. Kael turned back to Elara, his eyes filled with determination and a hint of concern. "This is only the beginning," he said. "But I promise you we will fight together, no matter what comes." Elara nodded, her heart racing with the knowledge that her life had changed forever. She had been given a new purpose, a new future, and she would face it with him, the Alpha King who had once been cursed, but was now free, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the days passed, the air in the citadel grew heavier with tension, and Elara could feel it settling in her chest like a storm waiting to break. Kael had kept his promise. He stood by her, always at her side, guiding her through the challenges they faced. but the weight of their union, of their bond, was something neither of them could fully understand yet. The nobles whispered behind their backs, the council still eyed her with suspicion, and the kingdom, though relieved to see Kael free from the curse, was not so easily swayed. Many saw Elara, the once forgotten Omega, as an intrusion, a stain on the tradition of their kingdom, and no amount of Kael's protection could erase their doubts. Elara spent her days walking the halls of the citadel, getting accustomed to the lavish surroundings that were now her home, but she never felt truly settled. The weight of their expectations, the invisible barriers that separated her from the others, felt like chains of their own. Kael, as determined as ever to face the challenges head-on, often pulled her into discussions about the kingdom's future, about rebuilding what had been shattered by the curse. Despite the nobles' whispers, despite their disapproval, he remained steadfast, never once showing weakness in front of her. But Elara knew the truth. She knew how hard he was fighting, how the pressure of being the Alpha King weighed heavily on his shoulders. And she knew that she was not yet truly accepted. One afternoon, as Kael prepared to meet with his generals, he turned to Elara, his gaze softening. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "About what?" she asked, her heart racing, unsure if the conversation would take the path she feared. Kael's expression grew serious, a shadow crossing his features. "The rebellion," he began, his words heavy. "They are growing stronger, and I fear that they may try to strike. Soon. I know you've heard the rumors. My council, the nobles, they want me to do things their way, but I won't bend. I need you by my side, Elara. We cannot face this divided." Elara felt her stomach tighten. She had feared this day, the day when they would have to confront the forces that threatened their rule. But what did it mean for her, to stand beside him in such a moment? What did it mean to be his Luna, when she had spent her life in the shadows, watching as others held power? Kael took her hands in his grip firm but gentle, and his voice softened. "You have more power than you realize. You are not just my mate, you are my equal. The kingdom must understand that. And I will make them understand." His words were a promise, but the doubt in Elara's heart remained. She had never asked for power, had never dreamed of it. All she had ever wanted was to be seen, to matter. But now, standing beside the Alpha King, her life was no longer her own. It was tied to his fate, to the fate of the kingdom, and she didn't know if she was ready for it. "Kael," she whispered, "I am not like the other women of this court. I am not like the nobles who were born into their power. I don't know how to be the Luna of this kingdom." Kael's gaze softened and he stepped closer, his forehead resting gently against hers. "You don't need to be like them," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "You only need to be yourself. That's all I've ever needed." Elara closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she was enough, but the doubt lingered in her chest. She had been taught her whole life to remain unseen, to know her place. Now everything was changing, and she didn't know how to keep up. As the days wore on, the tension in the citadel only grew. The whispers of rebellion were no longer just rumors, they had become a reality. The nobles were starting to gather forces, plotting against Kael's rule, and Elara could feel the heat of the tension rising. One evening, as she stood in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Kael approached her, his footsteps silent on the stone path. "You are my strength, Elara," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "Without you I am nothing. The curse may be broken, but I need you now more than ever." Elara turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted, the weight of the words heavier than she had expected. Kael's expression softened, and he took her hands in his once more, his grip tight. "You are more than strong enough. You just don't see it yet. Together we will rebuild. Together we will take back what's ours." Elara nodded, though her heart still ached with uncertainty. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. She couldn't stand by and let Kael fight this battle alone. The rebellion was coming, and it was time for her to step into the role she had been chosen for, whether she was ready or not. The days that followed were filled with constant tension and preparations for the inevitable rebellion that loomed over the kingdom like a dark cloud. Elara could feel the weight of it on her shoulders more than ever. The council had been holding secret meetings, Whispers of betrayal and discontent echoed through the citadel, and even the servants who once greeted her with kindness now kept their distance, their eyes full of wariness. She had never imagined that her life, so quiet and unnoticed, would become so tangled with the fate of a kingdom. Kael, ever determined, had not wavered in his resolve. Every night he spent in the war room with his generals, formulating plans, discussing strategies, but always with a glance toward her when he returned to their chambers. She had never seen him so focused, so driven. She knew the rebellion was not just a threat to his rule. It was a challenge to everything he had fought for. And yet, despite the danger closing in, Kael never once doubted her place by his side. It was almost too much to bear at times, the pressure to be more than she ever thought she could be. One evening, after the sun had set and the shadows crept into the grand halls of the citadel, Kael sought her out in the garden. The moonlight bathed the flowers in silver, and the soft night air carried the scent of jasmine and roses, but Elara could not shake the feeling of unease that clung to her like a second skin. As she turned, she saw Kael approaching, his silhouette tall and commanding, even in the low light. There was a certain heaviness in his step that night, an exhaustion that hadn't been there before. "Elara," he said softly, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "I need to speak with you." His tone was urgent, yet gentle, and Elara felt her heart skip a beat. She stood from the stone bench where she had been sitting, unsure of what he was about to say. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and fear. Kael's expression was unreadable, his eyes dark as he stepped closer. "The rebellion is closer than we thought," he said, his words low, almost like a confession. "They are gathering forces on the eastern border, and I fear they may strike within the week. I cannot keep you safe here if they come. I cannot protect you the way I want to." Elara's heart twisted at his words. She had known that the rebellion was coming, but hearing it from Kael, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, made it all too real. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Kael sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, his shoulders slumping slightly in defeat. "I am saying that I need to send you away for your safety. The rebellion will be ruthless, and I cannot risk losing you. You are too important to me, Elara." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, but Elara's chest tightened with a surge of defiance. "No," she said firmly, taking a step toward him. "I will not leave you. You promised we would face this together." Kael's eyes searched hers as if looking for a trace of doubt, but found none. "Elara, you don't understand," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is not just a rebellion. This is an attack on everything we have built, on everything I have fought for. If I lose you—" He trailed off, his words too painful to finish. Elara reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Kael," she said softly, "I am not going anywhere. If you fight, I fight. If they try to tear us apart, we will tear them down together." Kael looked at her, his gaze intense as if weighing her words. For a moment silence stretched between them, the weight of their decision hanging in the air like an invisible force. Finally Kael spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "You are not like the others, Elara," he said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You are stronger than I ever imagined." A small warm smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I learned from the best," she replied, her gaze never leaving his. Kael pulled her into his arms then, holding her tightly against him as if the world could disappear and leave them there in that moment. For a brief second Elara allowed herself to relax, to close her eyes and let the warmth of Kael's embrace fill her. But the reality of their situation was never far from her mind. The rebellion was coming, and they had no choice but to face it. The next morning the kingdom stirred with urgency. Kael called together his generals, his counselors, and Elara stood at his side as they planned their strategy. The council was divided, some still skeptical of Elara's place beside the king, but Kael was unwavering. "We are stronger together," he declared, his voice firm and resolute. "And we will win this battle, not because of blood or magic, but because we stand united." Elara stood beside him, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She was no longer the forgotten Omega. She was the Luna of the Alpha King, and she would fight beside him until the very end. As the days passed, the citadel was alive with a sense of anticipation and quiet urgency. Elara could feel it in the air. the tension that gripped the kingdom as it prepared for the inevitable clash with the rebellious forces. Kael had not been idle since their meeting in the garden. His every movement was purposeful, every decision weighed with the knowledge that their lives, their future, depended on the actions they took now. Elara, too, had found her place in the midst of the preparations. The nobles still eyed her with suspicion, but with each passing day, she could feel herself gaining strength, not just from Kael's side but from within herself. She was no longer the forgotten Omega, she was a force to be reckoned with. As Kael strategized with his generals, Elara had begun her own preparations. She would not be a passive bystander in this fight. She had learned enough of the court's politics, enough about the kingdom's defenses, to understand that her role was not just to be Kael's mate but to be his partner in every sense of the word. And in the coming battle, she would stand beside him, not behind him. One evening as Kael returned from his meeting with the generals, his face was hard with resolve, but there was a hint of something else in his eyes, concern, maybe fear, though he never spoke of it. He had always carried the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders, but now with the rebellion at their doorstep, it felt heavier than ever. Elara was waiting for him in their chambers, sitting by the fire, her thoughts racing. She could not help but feel the weight of what was coming, but she refused to let fear take root. "They are ready," Kael said as he entered, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. "The army is prepared to move at dawn. We will face them head-on." "But Elara..." His voice faltered just for a moment, and Elara looked up, meeting his gaze. "What is it?" she asked, her heart in her throat. "This battle." Kael hesitated, his words heavy with meaning. "It will not be just about defeating them. It will be about breaking them, about showing them that I will not bow to anyone. And it will be dangerous. I cannot promise that we will come through this unscathed." Elara stood then, walking toward him, her step steady and sure. She reached out, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "Kael," she said softly, her voice firm, "we will face this together. We will not let fear control us. Not now. Not ever." Kael's eyes softened, and for a moment the king's armor seemed to fall away, revealing the man beneath. The man who had fought so long to protect his kingdom, to protect her. "You are my strength, Elara," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Without you I am nothing." Her heart swelled at his words, and she gave him a small reassuring smile. "We are stronger together," she said, echoing his own words from earlier. Kael nodded, his expression resolute. "Tomorrow we fight," he said, his voice steady once more. "And whatever comes we will face it together." The next day as the sun rose over the horizon, Elara stood at Kael's side, her armor gleaming in the early light. The battlefield stretched out before them, the sound of marching feet and the clatter of weapons filling the air. Kael, his sword drawn and his stance unyielding, turned to her one last time before they entered the fray. "Stay close," he said, his voice a low command. "I will protect you, but you must trust in your own strength as well. This battle will test us both." Elara nodded, her grip tight on the hilt of her own sword. She had trained for this moment, and though fear still clung to her like a shadow, she was ready. They rode into the heart of the battlefield, the clash of steel ringing in their ears as the two forces met. Elara fought with everything she had, her every move a testament to the strength Kael had always seen in her. She was no longer just the forgotten Omega. She was a warrior fighting for the kingdom she had come to love, for the man she had come to stand beside. The battle raged on for hours, the blood of both sides staining the earth beneath their feet. Kael fought with unmatched fury, his every strike a reminder of the power he had reclaimed. Elara too fought with a fierce determination, her sword cutting through the chaos as she moved swiftly through the ranks, her eyes always on Kael. The rebellion would not break them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, signaling the end of the battle, Kael and Elara stood victorious. The rebels had been defeated, their forces scattered, and the kingdom was safe for now. Kael, his armor battered and bloodied, turned to her, his expression filled with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with relief. Elara's heart swelled as she looked at him, her breath coming in short bursts. "We did it," she repeated, her voice strong. The battle was over, but their fight was far from finished. Together they had faced the darkness, and together they would rebuild the kingdom. This was only the beginning. The aftermath of the battle left the kingdom in a delicate balance, the heavy air filled with both relief and uncertainty. The rebels had been defeated, their forces scattered, but the victory felt like a fleeting shadow compared to the greater challenges that lay ahead. Elara stood beside Kael, her hand gripping his as they watched the final remnants of the rebellion retreat. Though the battlefield had been won, the true war, the one for the hearts and minds of the people, was only just beginning. The citadel was alive with the sounds of soldiers tending to the wounded, servants rushing to gather what was needed, and the quiet murmurs of the nobles, who had begun to shift their allegiances with the tide of the battle. Kael's eyes scanned the horizon, his expression hardened, as if the victory meant little compared to the weight of his responsibilities. Elara could feel the exhaustion in his body, the strain in his shoulders, but she also saw something else in his gaze. An unwavering determination. "We did what we had to do," Kael said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the day's events. "But this is just the beginning. The council will not bow to us so easily. They will test us every step of the way. They will want to see how much we're willing to sacrifice to keep this kingdom together." Elara nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge that their journey was far from over. She had fought at Kael's side, but now she understood the true nature of their fight. It wasn't just about power. It was about trust, loyalty, and the strength to lead a kingdom through its darkest hours. "We will face it together," she said, her voice steady, matching his determination. Kael looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You've changed," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I've always known you were strong, but you've become something more. Something unbreakable." Elara felt a surge of pride at his words, but also a sense of doubt. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be a symbol of power or strength. All she had ever wanted was to be seen, to stand beside the man she loved, to fight for a future she believed in. But now, with the kingdom's future hanging in the balance, she realized that she could no longer hide in the shadows. The rebellion had shown her the depth of her own power, but it had also revealed the harsh realities of the world they lived in. She was no longer just an Omega. She was Kael's Luna, and the kingdom would look to her as much as they looked to him. "We'll need the support of the people," Elara said, her gaze sweeping over the kingdom. "We cannot rule through fear alone. We need their loyalty, their trust." Kael's expression softened, but there was a fire in his eyes that Elara knew all too well. "We will earn it," he said, his voice firm. "And we will not back down. Not now. Not ever." As the sun set behind them, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold, Elara felt the weight of the future press down on her, but she also felt a sense of resolve settling in her chest. The battle for the kingdom was far from over, but she was no longer afraid. Together she and Kael would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and they would rebuild the kingdom, not with fear, but with strength, loyalty, and love. The coming days would be filled with hard decisions, but they would face them united. No rebellion, no force could tear them apart. Kael had broken the curse, and now together, they would break the chains that held their kingdom captive. The true battle had just begun, but Elara was ready. She was no longer a forgotten Omega. She was the Luna of the Alpha King, and she would fight for the future they had yet to create. As the weeks passed, the citadel began to change. The kingdom was still recovering from the rebellion, but with Kael and Elara leading together, a new sense of hope started to spread throughout the land. The once divided nobles, though still wary of Elara, began to understand that she was not just the Luna by Kael's side. She was a force of her own, a woman of strength and conviction. The court, which had once looked down on her, now began to respect her for her courage and the power she wielded alongside Kael. Elara no longer felt like a shadow in the background. She stood proudly beside the Alpha King, her role as Luna becoming clearer with each passing day. Together they began to rebuild the kingdom. They worked tirelessly, forging alliances, gaining the trust of the people, and strengthening the defenses of the citadel. The rebellion had fractured the kingdom, but Kael and Elara were determined to unite it once again. Yet, despite their victories, there was still the lingering presence of doubt from within and without. The counselors, though more cooperative now, still whispered behind closed doors. The nobles, though they respected Kael's strength, had not fully accepted Elara as their equal. Elara knew it would take time to win their loyalty, but she was willing to fight for it. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this was no different. One evening, as Kael and Elara sat in their chambers, reviewing the reports from the generals, Kael looked at her. His eyes filled with both admiration and concern. "We've made progress," he said, his voice quiet but filled with determination. "But the real work is just beginning. There are still forces that seek to divide us, Elara. They are patient, they will wait for our guard to slip." Elara nodded, her gaze steady. "We cannot let our guard down. But we cannot let fear control us either. We've fought too hard to let this kingdom fall apart now." Kael smiled, a rare and genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You are right," he said. "And we will not let fear rule us. We will face whatever comes together." As the days passed, Kael and Elara continued their efforts to unite the kingdom. They traveled from village to village, from town to town, meeting with the people, listening to their concerns, and reassuring them that they were no longer living in the shadow of a curse. Kael's presence, once feared, became a symbol of strength and protection. Elara's presence, once dismissed, became a symbol of hope and resilience. The kingdom slowly began to heal, but the road ahead was still long. One night, as Elara stood on the balcony of the citadel, gazing out at the sprawling kingdom below, Kael joined her. The night was calm, the moonlight casting a soft glow over the land. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," Elara said, her voice filled with both awe and gratitude. "Just a few months ago I was a forgotten Omega, and now we are leading this kingdom." Kael stepped beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "You were never forgotten," he said, his voice low. "And now the whole kingdom knows who you are. You are my equal, Elara. You always have been." Elara turned to face him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. "Without your belief in me." Kael smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made Elara's heart flutter. "And I couldn't have done this without you," he replied. "Together, we are unstoppable." As they stood there side by side watching over the kingdom they had fought so hard to protect, Elara realized something. They had faced the darkness together, and they had come out stronger for it. The future of the kingdom was uncertain, but with Kael by her side, she knew they could face anything. Their bond, their love had broken the curse that had once bound them, and together, they would build a future where they ruled not with fear, but with strength, love, and unity. Elara was no longer the forgotten Omega. She was the Luna, and the Alpha King's mate, and together, they would ensure that their kingdom would never again fall into darkness.